Should Fujifilm shooters switch to the Nikon ZF? No, not the titled full frame versus APS-C argument, but instead another question. What's your favorite Fuji lens? Over the past 10 years, I've shot with 14 X-mount prime lenses split across 3 generations. Each generation of lenses is targeting a different type of photographer. I only switched to Nikon after I realized that I'm no longer Fuji's main target audience, so I'll ask you again, what's your favorite Fuji lens? Hello, I'm Jack, scientist by day, street photographer by night, and this is Bokeh Therapy. I do love melodramatic endnotes, and I also love both Nikon and Fuji, but I stopped upgrading my Fujifilm kit 3 years ago. It was when they started releasing Mark II of all of their lenses. This video is the one I wish I saw 3 years ago, because back then I couldn't decide. Do I spend thousands of dollars to upgrade my whole Fuji kit or just switch systems altogether? Luckily now there's another choice, third-party lenses. There are no sponsors for this video. I paid for all the Fuji and Nikon cameras and lenses myself, but Per Gear kindly sent me the Viltrox 56mm f1.7 for testing. They're not sponsoring this video. No one gets to review this video before it goes live, but me, I did score a discount code for channel viewers, more later in the video. Are the newer crop of third-party lenses good enough to sway our camera brand loyalty? Photography YouTube used to be simple. The videos were too long, the lighting was bad, but it felt creative and exciting, like joining a secret club. While everyone else was shooting Canon, Sony, or Nikon, I found Fujifilm through those videos. I loved the X100, but the X Pro 2 gave me a creative spark. I loved how sleek, unobtrusive, and retro it looked, and the fact that it wasn't mainstream honestly made me feel a little smug. Fuji was the indie band no one had yet heard of, and I was proud to be an X Pro shooter, their flagship camera at the time, and I became a member of another secret club. If your favorite Fuji lens is the 18mm f2, 35mm f1.4, 23mm f1.4, or 56mm f1.2 version 1, you fall into Fujifilm's first generation. Perfectly imperfect lenses that were compact, vintage rendering, and had shallow enough depth of field. The trade-off? Not always the sharpest or best corrected, and really the autofocus suffered the most. Even on the newer Fuji cameras, these Gen 1 lenses don't work great in continuous tracking mode. I had to use AFS on the smallest focus point, focus mode dial set to M, and back button focus. I was always focused and recomposing, but when you zoom into 100% to check critical focus on playback, the camera by default zooms into the focus point, not what you recompose to. You don't have to do this on the Nikon ZF. 3D tracking, subject detection, all works without much fuss, and when you check critical focus, it even gives you an option to quickly toggle between all the faces it detects in frame. It's a nice quality of life upgrade, nothing that should make you switch camera systems altogether, although that compact form factor and vintage rendering can also be found on Nikon. 28mm f2.8, 40mm f2. Amazingly small for full frame lenses with enough character to make your images a bit less digital. Unlike the metal lenses with aperture rings on the Fuji, these lenses are mostly rubber and plastic. This does mean they're better sealed against the elements because of fewer moving parts though. If you're a Gen 1 Fuji lens fan, you may want to consider switching to Nikon. Even though it was called the X Pro 2, it was really a Gen 1 Fuji product in the best ways. The EVF wasn't the best though. There was no flip screen, no 4K video or USB-C charging, but it was a brick. Bulletproof in hand, the first Fuji camera to get a whole suite of pro features. This includes a new 24 megapixel X-Trans 3 sensor at the time, the first Fuji camera with 2 SD card slots for a backup workflow, upgraded weather sealing to the point where they released a photo of a crumpled up X Pro 2 that had been to hell and back to show just how serious they were taking build quality on their flagship camera. I feel this was Fuji in the good old days. Then came the X Pro 3. Along with that crumpled up photo of the X Pro 2 was the Fujicrons, and if your favorite Fuji lens is any of them, 23, 35 or 50mm f2 lenses, I don't think you should switch. They're all metal, weather sealed, work beautifully with continuous tracking on the newer Fuji bodies, and they've got modern rendering that's closer to what Nikon's f1.8 S primes are going for. These Fujicrons make the system so much smaller and lighter than a full frame setup. Now it's true at f2 and APS-C you can't get the full frame look, but you really can't beat the form factor. For professional event work, f2, even with IBIS indoors, you might need a flash. For video and tweaking AF tracking sensitivity is a lens-by-lens nightmare on Fuji bodies. That would be the main reason to switch from a Fujicron setup to Nikon. If you're okay with the weight, which is a big if, all of the bigger f1.8 S primes are great for video. Minimal to no focus breathing, and the default autofocus settings work right out of the box. 3D tracking for fast moving objects doesn't work as well as Sony, but it is quite a bit ahead a Fuji. On the ZF menus, if you go to G5 and G6 in the custom pencil menu, you can increase the AF speed and tracking sensitivity for video, which interestingly also improves the photo autofocus speed as well. But if you don't shoot video, just stick with the Fujicrons in your everyday kit. In the blink of an eye, a decade goes by, and great lighting and fast glass can make basements look like movie sets. Everyone's cameras and skills got so much better, and a lot of channels went mainstream. And frankly, so did Fujifilm. The X Pro 3 was announced 4 years after the X Pro 2, but it was a letdown. No IBIS, still the same battery, just now with EVF color shifts, broken cables, and the infamous flipped screen of death. But the worst part was knowing that X Pro shooters simply aren't the top priority anymore. It was bittersweet. No longer a cult following, they released the video-centric XH2S to compete on the market, but they couldn't have designed a camera more different to the X Pro line. All the latest bells and whistles now go to the XT and XH lines, and almost 5 years later, there's still no X Pro 4 in sight. Because once their flagship has now become an afterthought, we've been left behind. If your favorite Fuji lens is the 18mm, 33mm, or 23mm f1.4 LMs, you're in the toughest spot. Linear motors, weather resistance, and corner-to-corner sharpness wide open to resolve 40 megapixels. If you've got the full set, there's no need to switch to Nikon. But what if you have one or none? The 23 and 33mm are about the same size and weight as Nikon's 35 and 50 f1.8. These newer Fuji lenses should be paired with the best EVF to see that IQ, but that only comes on the XH2 or the XH2S. Once you add this bigger body, it's a toss-up. The weight difference versus the Nikon ZF, negligible. Autofocus, low light, build quality, retro design, they're all either tied or go to the Nikon ZF with its full frame sensor. It's not an easy decision, but we can't forget the sunk cost fallacy. Just because you've already spent thousands of dollars doesn't mean you have to continue spending thousands of dollars on the same brand. But other than switching systems entirely, there is a third path, going with third-party glass. Viltrox is just one of the third-party lens manufacturers, and they've made some amazing glass 27mm, 75mm f1.2 Pro lenses, super sharp, a little bit big, but really weather resistant and robust. But the first Viltrox lens I wanted to try is the 56mm f1.7, because oddly it's also a spot that's missing in Fuji's lineup. Fuji's old 56mm f1.2 is super sharp, but people complain about its price, weight, chromatic aberration, and slow autofocus. With their new 56mm f1.2 RWR, they fixed the IQ but made it bigger, more expensive, still with deeply flawed autofocus. This Viltrox 56mm, tiny in comparison, under 200 grams, mostly plastic, does have a little bit of metal, including the lens mount, but it's $200. And at f1.7, the depth of field is beautiful. You get plenty of bokeh, a bit of vignetting and cat's eye bokeh around the corners, but chromatic aberration is very well controlled. I haven't seen fringing in any of my shots wide open at f1.7 in broad daylight. It's very impressive. It comes with a USB-C port on the lens mount, and Viltrox just recently released a firmware update for this lens for autofocus at close distances. Its minimum focus distance is 0.55 meters. It's closer than the old Fuji 56, about the same as the new Fuji 56. A reminder, it's less than a fifth of the price and a third of the weight. In my use, the Viltrox had accurate and predictable autofocus, but it is slower than the linear motor lenses. It takes longer to acquire focus initially, but once it's locked on, it starts tracking. Actually, it works better than a lot of Fuji lenses because it's consistent and predictable even on an old X-T3, something Fuji couldn't pull off even on their newer 56mm. You can find this lens on the Pergear website, where you'll receive 5% off if you use the code Bokeh Therapy. Thank you again to Pergear for sending this lens out to me for testing. Look, right now it's a great time to get into photography without breaking the bank. It's not just Viltrox, there's also Sigma, TT Artisan. All these options 3 years ago honestly might not have switched. A tiny compact 56mm that can autofocus reliably pairs perfectly with my favorite Fuji lens of all time. For our photography niche on YouTube, views are down across the board. I don't know about you, but the reason I've stopped watching is not because of ads, clickbait, or the Panasonic S9, but because I've been creating more than consuming. My channel is now 6 months old. There's no how-to guide for the next step. All I know is I need to stay connected to this community. Thank you to Nima RGB, as well as all of you, or any of you who've supported the channel, but this one goes out to my fellow YouTube photography creators. Hope the views aren't getting you down. You all inspire me so much. Just don't forget about those of us who've been here since the start. My favorite Fuji lens is by far the 23mm f1.4 version 1. Compact, sharp, perfectly imperfect with oodles of micro contrast, manual focus clutch with distance indicators right on the lens. But ex-pro shooters, after the charm of smaller character lenses, must just not be a priority anymore because they don't make them like they used to. Why would they? When the new linear motor lenses and bigger camera bodies have cleaner results and are selling like hotcakes. But if it's ultimate IQ and specs you're chasing, there are cheaper ways to get there, and that's the biggest reason I switched to Sony then to Nikon. I never used Fuji for the specs. I was just chasing a feeling, and I'm still waiting along with the rest of us for the X Pro 4. Fuji have inspired and continue to inspire me so much. Just don't forget about those of us who've been here since the start.